Hey everyone, Doug Adams here from RunDNA Podcast. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Excited to expand on those four elements that we talked about being great at Gait. If you missed that episode, just a quick review. We talked about a triangle basically of what you need, the skills, the knowledge to be really great at working with a client's gait. And those for review were understanding biomechanics, being able to assess movement capabilities, being able to do gait retraining, and at the center of it was coaching. So I want to expand on the middle one because that's a really important part. And I'm going to challenge the status quo a bit here. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it honestly. And the question is, how much time do you spend designing programs versus delivering programs? So, for example, if you're working with a client that has an injury and you're trying to rehab their Achilles, how much time do you spend thinking about the exercises versus how much time are you working with them one on one, making sure that they're doing the exercises correctly and making sure that they have good form and technique? Or how much time, if you're working with a sports performance client and you're giving them a workout program, how much time is spent on which exercises to do versus if you're working on them one on one in the gym, showing them proper technique, giving them feedback. And I think if you answer this honestly, most people are going to say that they spend a lot more of their day actually applying the programs that they design. However, if you ask somebody how much time they spend researching or learning about the program design versus the coaching aspect of the program, they're going to say that they spend a lot more time thinking about or really researching and trying to find new ways to design programs. But there's most of what they do is actually applying that. So if you ask somebody to speak on, I want you to talk about a Achilles program versus I want you to talk about how to coach an Achilles program, the person is probably going to be a lot more likely to be confident and capable of talking about the exercise selection more so than the cueing aspect. And if we're spending the majority of our time coaching, and I'm using that term universally, right? Whether you're a physical therapist, an athletic trainer, chiropractor, personal trainer, podiatrist, whatever you're doing, I want you to think about how much time you're coaching. And that's the coaching means you're actually telling people what to do with that. So in this one, this episode, my goal is to get you to start thinking about and start emphasizing more your coaching skills. I mentioned in our podcast last time that we are doing live skills retraining and live skills classes that is all focused on gait retraining. And this is a big part of it, the coaching aspect. So I wanted to give you a little preview of what you're going to learn, and we're going to expand on it a lot more. But there's some things that if you're going to a course or thinking about it, or maybe you're not able to, but you want to improve your coaching, that's what I want to give you a few tips and tricks that you can start off with now to improve those coaching skills. So before we do that, again, if you still need a little bit more convincing, we have to think about what is the best program. The best program is the one that the client does and that they also do well, because we want to make sure that the goal for the program is being accomplished. And if they're just flying through the exercises with bad technique or bad form, you might actually be detracting from your goal as opposed to getting closer to it. So here are some coaching tips that you can do that will really help you. The first thing that I see people have a lot of trouble with is clarity and simplicity. I would challenge people to think about complex things and think about how they explain them simply. So taking a concept such as spring mass model stiffness of the lower leg, and being able to explain that to a patient in a simple analogy, saying that, oh, our body acts like a spring. The stiffer we are, the less the spring moves. The less stiff we are, the more the spring moves. And this springiness of our body can contribute to how efficient we are with movement. Being able to take a very complex, multifactorial thing like leg stiffness and be able to explain it simply is something we should really work on and try to make ourselves better with it. And also being able to provide clarity. Here's the thing, though, and this is where I want to give yourself permission to not be great to start, which a lot of people listening to this are type A and don't like not being good at things, but you're not going to be great at it to start. But if you don't start, you never will be great at it. So give yourself permission to fumble with your words. Give yourself permission to not have your final analogy on the first time you use it with a patient, because you're going to get closer and closer to it. I don't know who's responsible for this quote, but I'm sure you've heard it elsewhere as well, that you don't truly understand something until you can explain it simply. So you might have all these articles you read, you might have all these things that you know and they're intuitive to you, but until you can explain that simply to your clients, that's not going to have the same effect. And that's really important because the client has to have understanding and buy-in of why they're doing what you're asking them to do. This is where we also need to adapt to the type of learner that they are. So this is kind of a sub point underneath clarity and simplicity, is also have multiple ways to explain things, multiple ways to teach them or to accomplish what you're looking for. Because somebody might be very visual. And this is something I do all the time with the 3D. I'll bring up another Gait file and show them, here's an example of what I would like you to do. Look at their shin versus your shin angle. Look at their foot heat map versus yours and the shape of what that looks like. And I can show them there and what the desired result is. So that might be for somebody that's very visual, but other people I have, they're like, I don't know what you're saying. I'm a tactile learner. So I will be using resources. I'll teach people. I have this new TheraBand trick that I've been using with people on the treadmill for Gait retraining that has been working really, really well. And we'll teach that in the live skills lab, but that gives a tactile sensation where they know if they're accomplishing or not, because they're actually getting a tactile sensation to say like, oh, I did hit the band or I didn't hit the band. And that's what my goal was. And also our verbal feedback. The words we use with one person may stick, and the same words with a different person might not stick at all. So we have to adapt to their learning style. Along those same lines, and the next tip of coaching that I would suggest is develop your story bank. Start to get your success stories, write them down, so that you can go back and review them and think about later, like, why was that a success story? What were the situations that were happening that made that a success? And then being able to share those back with your client, of being able to say, yeah, I worked with this runner and they took 10 minutes off their marathon just by doing Gait retraining. That's one of my stories. We were at the Chicago Marathon. We did 100 Gait analysis in 2 days. And I got all these emails, and one runner was like, I was not in great shape. I was just looking to participate and finish this marathon. You did my Gait retraining 2 days before the race, and I took 10 minutes off and felt great the whole time. That's not a typical scenario here, and I don't always recommend changing your form 2 days before a marathon, but it was something that you can show people that there is a benefit to doing what you're asking them to do. So develop your story bank to make sure that you've got these examples that you can go back to and people know exactly what they could achieve by doing what you're asking them. The next part, and this is a much more complicated thing that we will go into more detail when we are at the life skills lab, but it's using external cues. So the difference of, I want you to engage your glutes and extend your hip and knee versus push into the ground, or imagine that you're crushing something underneath of your foot. Those are two very different cues. And I want you to think about how that affects the person's ability to learn and how that affects their overall strategy and focus. We'll talk a lot about focus and what you are getting them to think about while you're asking them to change their movement. And I use some of the weirdest cues that might sound just ridiculous to people, but I want to make sure that I have ways that they can feel the difference in their movement. And if they actually use the cue or not is irrelevant. It has to do with getting them to understand what the movement should feel like. And I'm going to use cues that might seem weird to them, but it helps them get there. And then finally, I think a really important aspect of coaching that people aren't always thinking a lot about is the motivational aspect of it. And we teach at Omega Project and in our courses. So the providers that work for me, with me, we use a lot of motivational interviewing, asking them questions that gets them to be self-motivated to do what you're asking them to do. What would happen if you ran this marathon and didn't change your form? What would happen? Do you think you would have another injury again if you don't address the root cause of this issue? Or now that we've identified your hip mobility restrictions, how do you think that's playing into how you're participating in your sport? So using these motivational interviewing and getting good at those types of questions and even writing those down too. Again, I thought in a different podcast, I've talked about different levels of expertise. And I think that a lot of times people don't truly develop expertise until they start writing it down and teaching other people. But the step before teaching other people, when the real expertise comes in, is that you need to write it down, because when you write it down, it needs a certain level of clarity that is different from thinking it in your head. So we need to get this level of clarity by writing it down. Write those stories down, write your motivational interviewing questions, write your cues down, write some of your analogies out, and develop a coaching journal. Like what went well, what didn't. It is a skill set that will make a huge difference. I said this in the last podcast, but this has happened countless times where a client will come to me and they've worked with other clients or with other providers. And I'll sometimes give them the exact same cue and get an entirely different result that is way more successful. And it's because of how I've refined my coaching skills, how I've taught myself and learned from others how you can just get the result. Where if you design the best program in the world, but nobody does it or nobody understands it, then it's not the best program in the world. The best program is the one that they do and that they do it well. So next steps, get some practice, write it down, even record yourself, right? Set up your phone, record yourself with your analogy, listen to yourself talk. Would I follow what I have to say? Would I understand what I'm doing? And finally, ask for feedback with your clients. Did that make sense? What did you find confusing about that? In a non intimidating way, just asking them for some feedback, but get that feedback. I hope you'll see that working on coaching is a critical aspect of being great with Gait. And really, it's not just Gait, it's any intervention, it's any population you work with. This is a universally beneficial thing. If you are better at coaching and instructing, you are going to be better at providing really skilled programs. And most importantly, you're going to be better at getting results. Because at the end of the day, what really matters is the results that we're getting with our clients and their satisfaction with how we got there. So this is expanding on one of those 4 elements of being great at Gait, and we're going to continue to break some of these down, but encourage you to check out RunDNA.com, look for our live skills lab. This is what the number one thing people have been asking us more for. We've got some of those example Gait analysis coming out shortly of what it looks like to do a gait analysis. So depending on when you're listening to this, some of those might already be out. Check out our YouTube channel. Look at me doing gait analysis, other people doing gait analysis, so that you get reps and example. But focus on your coaching, focusing on how you can deliver excellent programs, and you are going to get exponentially positive benefits for you and for your clients. Thanks for listening to the RunDNA podcast. And as always, you can check out more and make sure you're getting our newsletter by signing up on RunDNA.com. Thank you.
Like what you hear? Leave a review of the show wherever you listen, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. RunDNA helps runners and running specialists through education and technology to identify each runner's unique injury profile to avoid setbacks and maximize results. The RunDNA podcast is produced by Ace Running LLC. The RunDNA podcast is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can occur. Always seek the guidance of qualified medical professionals before making healthcare decisions. Find us online at RunDNA.com.